Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from Chase Commercial Term Lending and New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Capital One Bank, the Wyckoff Group, Genova Burns, Giantomasi Webster, Greenberg Traurig. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Fisher Brothers, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Foley & Lardner, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, HAP Investment Developers, Herrick Feinstein, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, John Katsimides, Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knuckle Realty Services, Mattone Group, Mercantile Commerce Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, MHP Real Estate Services, People's United Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling National Bank, SterlingRisk, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, The Continuum Company, CUNY TV Foundation, the Moynihan Group, Urban American, and These Friends.
Sixty 60% of the companies in America are family businesses. Family businesses are the gross national profit of the world. I mean, Walmart is a family business. Sears was a family business. All these companies are family businesses. But there's a big difficulty with family businesses. It's transitioning the next generation to a family business. There's a challenge involved. So today, I've assembled 4 individuals, 3 who are in family businesses, to provide their thoughts and opinions on the challenges involved in the transitioning of a family business. My guests today include Josh Muss, who is the chairman and CEO of Muss Development, a real estate business. David Sterling, who's the chairman and CEO of SterlingRisk, one of the nation's preeminent P&C property and casualty and life and health insurance brokers. Paul Rich, who is the retired senior partner of Rothstein, who's a CPA and a specialist in family businesses. And last but not least, how could I have a show on family businesses without my friend Joe Mattone, who is the chairman and CEO of the Mattone Group.
Thank you.
But you're only a first generation transitioning to the second. He is a third generation transitioning to a fourth generation, and David is a third generation transitioning to a fourth generation. Paul, what normally happens from the first to the second to the third generation in business?
Firstly, it's a very, very, very hard thing, and it says a lot for a family when that can happen. The usually first generation works very hard, doesn't think so much in terms of the legacy he's building. He thinks in terms of paying his bills, making payroll, and working hard to grow a business. And then comes in the second generation, who is often very well prepared because of a closeness to the family values and to the love of the business and the parents, and often comes in a second generation that has either thoughts of entitlement or other things and goes there instead of where they need go. And when the second happens, the business more likely than not will not go to that next generation. And as you were starting to say, only roughly 1/3 of businesses maybe make it successfully to the second generation. And of that 1/3 remaining, only 10 to 12% make it to the third generation. And just to give you a statistic that, even though you mentioned not to, if you think about divorce rates being very, very roughly at 50%, And if you think about the statistics of businesses transferring from one down to the next, the chore becomes really how someone running a business can do two things. One, recognize that he or she is a leader, and what their goal is to create a family with good values, whose children become confident and competent and have a desire to appreciate how exciting it is to do something, be it take risk or just create. And so that there's more opportunity, that they have the ability, by way of merit, to bring that generational business into the next. And that is a hard thing to do.
Now, there was no family business when you went in, but in certain aspects, your brother, who was was helpful for you in growing your business. Your brother, Carl.
Carl.
You have 8 children.
Seven.
Seven
and one through marriage.
One through marriage. You have 8. You have 2 businesses. You have a very successful real estate ownership development business, and you have a legal business. Mm-hmm. Do you feel there are a lot of challenges in transitioning the business?
Oh, absolutely. Making the deals and making the so-called fortune is very challenging and very difficult. Passing it on seems to have been even becoming a more of a challenge in how you do it and do it fairly. I think the key word is that as the children grow up, their view of their participation also enlarges, and they all want what they feel should be provided to them. And as the parent, I have 2 of the 7, 5 working in the one aspect of the business or another, plus 2 fine associates who've been with me 33 and 32 years. And I attempt in my own fashion to divide what I think is the proper way to do it. As I accumulated my early fortune while they were not participants in the business, to that segment of the statement, if you will, I divided it 7 ways so that each one inherits, if you will, as a child. In the other portions, that as my son Carl and Michael and Joseph came into operations with me, and Irene and Teresa, they all now participate in a different percentage, because the extra work that the boys are performing, has to be recognized differently as the source of the worth value created.
Right, increasing the value of the business.
Right.
But here is the question that comes in. That's a financial number. It's what I'm looking at is, there's sibling rivalries. David was saying, and I'll let David talk about it. David, he's the 3rd generation. His grandfather started a business. Mm-hmm. His uncle and father went into the business. And his father, David, had to buy his uncle out because the business wouldn't have survived. So, there's a financial aspect, but there's an operational aspect of running a business, because, certain people do better chores or better roles.
So when I joined the business, I finished my last semester of college here on Long Island. I had been going to University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I came back to the business, worked full-time, and finished my last 30 credits or so. And it was clear that when I joined the business, everybody thought I was there because I was the boss's son. I had absolutely no merit.
Question, did you want to go into the business?
No. I wanted to be a psychologist, but I didn't see any real exciting future as a psychologist. I didn't know what I wanted to do, But I knew in the insurance business you get to be exposed to every kind of business. So I thought I'll find something I love. And I fell in love head over heels with the insurance business shortly into it. But the presumption was that I did not deserve whatever position and title I had. So, you know, in a lot of ways it made it much more difficult for me to be in the business. My uncle had a son about my age in the business. So there was a little sibling rivalry between my father and my uncle, which was clear to everybody who was working in the company. And so it wasn't, for the family's sake, it became apparent my father had to, or my uncle or my father, one had to buy the other out to really keep the family together. It turned out just by fate that my father bought my uncle out.
So now let's fast forward to your generation. You have a son, you have a stepson, you have a daughter.
Well, Mona and I together, I have 5 children. So one of Mona's sons is with Mona in her real estate development business. I have a daughter in law school. I have a son who was in the movie business in LA and came back and joined the business for a few years. And I have one of Mona's sons who joined me right out of college. See, he's been with the company for a number of years now. My son wanted to go off on his own, and about a year ago, he left, and he's now with an insurance company. So we have a mix of family business and the next generation coming up.
You're the third generation as opposed to him being the first. And you now have a fourth, a fifth generation, and we'll talk about it. A sixth is growing. But you literally have a fourth and a fifth generation who are involved with the business. Now, your grandfather came from South Africa, and your father had 11 brothers and sisters, correct?
Correct. 10.
How many went into the real estate business?
Just about all of them. Let's see, what do I have, 20 minutes to go? I mean, I grew up hearing and learning about real estate, mostly construction. Actually, we didn't know we were real estate. We thought we were builders. And it never occurred to me that there was anything else that I wanted to do. When I graduated...
But you went to Harvard, I mean.
Well,
but what happened, you know?
I graduated law school. I went to my dad. I said, okay, when do I start? He looked at me. He says, at the time, things weren't going well. I said, listen. I said, this is what I expect to do. This is what I'm going to do. And I moved into a desk with my brother and him in one room. And the next 25 years with my dad were terrific. The first 5 years, by the way, I thought he knew everything. The next 5 years, I decided he knew nothing. And afterwards, I figured it out.
Now, wait, I heard your brother. Is your brother still in the business?
My brother, at one point, sort of separated. He went into his own business, although we have many things together. And we still have many things which I am involved in terms of being in charge of making sure that they continue. Turn the tables. All of a sudden, I have kids. And I'm encouraged by the fact that I was happy to come into the business. One daughter raised children, although she was in the business. One daughter went into fine arts, which she continues to excel in. And then I have 2 sons in the business. Both of whom figured I knew everything for the first 5 years. Both of whom who figured I knew nothing for the next 5 years. One of them probably still thinks I know nothing. But we've morphed into where one of them is more involved on a day-to-day basis, and the other one is a little bit into his own projects.
When you have a family business, Paul, do you see parents pushing their kids to go into the family business? What do you normally see?
I think you see 2 sides of one coin. You see a lot of parents that say, I've lived this business, it's like one of my children, and I'd like you to join me. And you have others that say, I've worked so hard at this business for whatever reasons, giving up so much, I really rather that you became a professional or something other than this business. But the key has been that if there's a lot of sense of family, and there's a lot of sharing of the legacies and the stories and the values, children will understand and start feeling a closeness, first to the parents and then maybe to the business. And some, just the way you with your dad, will say, I really want to be in this business. And if the parents in general have helped this person to grow on his own so that he's competent and so that he's confident, and therefore he can bring merit to the business. He or she. It makes no difference here. Then that business is very fortunate because it can go forward, and the parents are very fortunate, as is the child. But it's not always easy.
Well, if I had to pose this question to all of you and whoever wants to answer it, what do you think is the biggest challenge in transitioning a family business? Josh, Jay, David? Yeah. Especially since your father, he was one of 11.
Well, I'll give you the current challenge. The current challenge is that I no longer make the only one who makes decisions. Now I have a board of directors, and I probably should have had one about 20 years ago to advise me about some of the crazy things I did. Now they're more into technology, more into the pro formers. I did the back of the envelope. Again, I probably would have done none of the projects that I did.
But you probably, if your son didn't come into the business, you may have never come into Manhattan.
If my son, or if I had no children in the business, I probably would have sold everything and gone to Florida and played golf. Okay.
I realize you played last week, but you're...
seriously though, it's a privilege and it's a thrill to be able to work with children, and you learn how to do it.
Joe?
It's an in-process learning. I think as Josh was making the last point, because the king is never recognized in his own country, And I've experienced exactly what he said. As the boys grew older, they started to voice a lot more input into the decisions that were made. And I began to recognize that, so I didn't oppose it. What I did was kind of bring them with me, trying to, keep the harmony. We can disagree, but we are still...
Yeah, but I heard he has a board. So I heard him just saying that if he's not the final decision maker.
Well, it's a little different than that. Right now, this morning, I had a conversation with somebody who would like us to do a project with him. And it was very exciting to me, something that I would have done in an instant 10 or 15 years ago. And I said, but I'm not going to be involved on a day-to-day basis, so you have to convince the other guys that it's a project worth taking into. And if you don't do it that way, then they'll all leave you and you'll be by yourself and you might as well sell out and go play golf.
I have that issue, not just with the next generation, because as my business grew, I get deals all the time that I get very excited about, and if I had the time, I would jump on them and do them, but I know they've got to excite the other people in the company. My biggest challenge with the next generation is finding their niche of talent. Yes. We were talking earlier, and Joe was explaining how this one is the CFO, and this one is the litigator, and this one is so forth. And that's the challenge, finding where people fit, the family fits in the organization, where everyone in the organization will understand that they merit that position.
We now have another complication, which I just heard of. When you have a family business and you have long-term employees, how do you take care of them for them to stay at the company, that they want to be part of the company, because you need them in many cases because they're growing the business. As you said, you have 2 employees who've been with you 32 and 33 years. And they're like family members.
Who, besides getting what I think is a nice salary, are also participants in minority positions in many of the deals. I've got that across to my sons, how important that is to keep the team together, and that you can't do it all by yourself. And as we grow older, Mr. Muss, we tend to do maybe a little less than we want to do.
Well, one of the challenges also is, and I'm not suggesting it's in my business, I don't think it is, But when you bring in family members, they better be qualified to do what it is that they're doing. Otherwise, you're going to discourage everybody else.
Right.
Because everybody who's working in that office, especially in my business, they're looking, what's the next project? Is it going to be successful? Do we have a future? And if they have a future, they participate. It's an exciting business. You see what happens from the dirt to the completion. So, but you have to pay them well, and you have to encourage them. You have to have fun.
Right. I mean, your business, you are SterlingRisk over there. But in order for you, and that you've grown, you've had to have some good salespeople and good administrative to retain these people in a family business, because SterlingRisk is a family business. And you've just said that there are a couple of generations who could continue.
Yeah, I just had 2 experiences this week that illustrate that point. I was calling up an ex-employee who I knew was working for a specialty business, and I had that type of insurance I needed to get placed, so I was calling her for advice. And she wasn't there. So I did a little investigating. What happened? Well, this particular small business had a bunch of family members come in, and at the top there really just wasn't enough room for everybody. You know, thank God in our business it's large enough that we can provide the kinds of things that Joe was talking about in terms of providing incentives for top-notch people to stay in either administrative, sales, or customer service roles. But it's what Josh was saying, it's critical that whatever role the family member gets put in, that they be viewed as competent for that role, because you're trying to keep all that.
But you just brought up the word competent. That is, you know, sometimes you know, when it's a family, you sometimes try to look away. I'm not saying...
That's why they fail.
That's right.
That's why they fail.
And
You can't look away.
you know, what reminds me is this, I'll say cartoon that I think is ascribed to Einstein. I might have it wrong, but the image is that a fish trying to climb a tree will always think himself as being stupid because he's not suited for that. And so what really has to happen is the second generation, for their best interest, and hopefully if they feel good enough about themselves, really know what they're good at, or explore to determine what they're good at, and put all their energy there, because we want them to be a success regardless of whether they're in the business or not. And if they could be a success in the business, that's even more wonderful, because there's a closeness and it's a continuation really of life in many respects. So that's important. And with regard to people who have been trusted employees or advisors within the company, and now having a second generation come in, we have to show that the culture of the business is such that we respect somebody for all the energies they put forth, and will continue to respect them for the continued energies they will be putting forth. And therefore, it's incumbent upon first or second generation to teach the next generation how to respect, how to learn, and how to, at some point, to bring in their own people when it's appropriate, without it being necessarily injurious to the person who's been there for so long, or else no one in the organization will have a sense of trust that this is their home. And then you'll really lose a lot of...
Another way of saying it, what you were saying about the obligation you owe the family. The very first obligation you owe the family is to keep the integrity of the business. Yeah. Because if you don't do that, you're hurting the family. And so that's what feeds everybody, and that's the legacy that everyone's going to have. Whatever role they either fit into or don't fit into that business, that's your obligation.
Now, something which I brought up in the green room is we all have this one with the family business, but we all have spouses, and that complicates the matter even more.
You talking about my spouse or my kids' spouses?
I'm talking about both. I'm talking about I'm talking about both.
Yeah. And let me say, just before we wind up on the new subject, maybe I've been particularly blessed with my kids. He went to UP, Wharton, Michael, and you know what you used to do on a yellow pad. Mannix and I used to do the same way.
Sure.
If we saw 15%, the deal could be made. You see. He went to the school, Wharton. I says, I don't understand half of your language. I says, much less how smart you are.
St. John's, okay.
Well, all right. Well, I didn't do too bad there either. But Carl had 17 years. He went to architectural for plan meeting and all of that, and he learned the real art of building buildings by working outside the firm with other firms. So he really got grewed into the construction business, which Josh will tell you is not an easy thing when you're going to bring it up from the ground. But that's where we always found value was. Value is not in buying something at a 5%
No, I'm not
return.
talking about
no,
that.
I'm just trying to say that,
But
that there are
now,
people.
you know, and it's too short of a time, but just it gets complicated even more with spouses.
It does, but the provision you do is you try to make provision equal to, but outside the necessary nexus.
I would say the complication of spouses is small compared to the complication of their children.
That's right.
Not only when they're coming in. I remember I would work from 6 in the morning till 10 at night every time. My son thinks he should spend more time with his kids, which I allow because they're my grandchildren. But the truth is that today parents are expected and should spend more time with their kids. So you just have to be smarter in less period of time.
It's a different life. It's a different time.
Life, different life.
Yeah, not in my situation, but I've seen through my clients, you do have situations where the siblings get along well, but the spouses, for whatever reason, they're feeling that they've got to push their spouse to have more or better or whatever. I've seen that happen. I haven't seen it in my own business though.
No,
I agree with Josh.
I'm just saying
That's the real problem.
There's a natural
From the outside forces pushing for their preeminence.
I shared with you a short philosophy, which hopefully will not happen, but I hope at the very end when everything is resolved, any disputes are blamed on me, not on their siblings, and not on their spouses, and not on their children.
Right.
And with that, in order for me to properly handle this topic, we could spend hours. But I do believe that we have accomplished a little bit and provided myself and my audience a little ideas on the challenges in transition. I'd like to thank Josh, David, Paul,
Thank you.
and of course, Joseph. See you next week.